The village of Hoa Long, Phuoc Tuy Province, 1967. The air doesn't move. It hangs, thick with wood smoke, manure, and the metallic scent of recent fear. An American platoon moves through the central dirt path, a slow, armored caterpillar. Their eyes scan rooftops and tree lines, fingers resting on rifle triggers. A sergeant crouches before an old farmer, whose face is a closed door. The sergeant points to his own eyes, then sweeps his hand toward the distant jungle. VC? Viet Cong? You see? The farmer stares blankly. The sergeant mimes a rifle firing. Bang! Bang! VC? A flicker of something passes behind the farmer's eyes, not understanding, but profound resignation. He shrugs, a universal gesture of, I cannot or will not help you. The communication has failed. The village, to the Americans, remains an indecipherable maze of walls and silent faces. 20 meters away, a different conversation is happening. An Australian digger, his slouch hat tipped back, is squatting in the dust beside a teenage boy. There is no weapon in his hands. Between them, a stick traces shapes in the dirt. The Australian's voice is a low, rough murmur, stitching together Vietnamese nouns with English verbs and a grammar of pure necessity. Cho toi biet. You see Mei Thang VC hôm qua? Yesterday? Đi Dao. Where go? It's not fluent Vietnamese, it's something else, a battlefield Creole, a pidgin built from survival needs and a fundamental radical acknowledgement. To understand this war, you must first be understood. To the American observers, this seemed like a quaint distraction, a soft-hearted waste of time for frontline infantry. The real war was fought with bullets and shells, not broken verbs. This perception was a critical and common blindness. This is the story of a weapon that made no sound, the power of speech itself. It's the story of how the Australian Army, dismissed for trying to talk, unlocked the human terrain of Vietnam, while a superpower, for all its might, remained tragically, permanently mute. The American approach to Vietnam was, at its core, a philosophy of technological and logistical transcendence. The war would be won by systems, air mobility, sensor technology, artillery grids, and body counts. In this vast industrial equation, the Vietnamese people were often relegated to a variable, either friendlies in secured hamlets or hostiles in contested ones. The task of communication was outsourced to a small specialist class, the Army Language School graduates and intelligence officers. For the common infantryman, interacting with the population was a dangerous, messy necessity. The tool provided was the Keet Kam Chai, the pocket guide of phrasebook Vietnamese. It was a script for a transaction, Dung Lai, stop, Chi Tai Len, hands up. It was the language of control, of interrogation, of command. Learning more seemed not just impractical amid 12-month rotations, but irrelevant. Why master the grammar of the village when you held the physics of the B-52? The Australian mindset, forged in the protracted counterinsurgencies of Malaya and Borneo, held a contrasting axiom. The population was not the backdrop to the war, it was the decisive terrain. You could not separate the guerrilla from the people he lived among. Therefore, winning meant not just controlling ground, but influencing minds. This began with a simple, profound imperative: make yourself intelligible. The Australian Army Training Team Vietnam, and later the regular infantry, institutionalized a brutal, functional approach to language. They didn't teach poetry, they taught survival. Dung Lai, stop, was vital, but so was Chung Toi Den Yup, we come to help. The goal was not fluency, but comprehension, the ability to ask for water, to ask for directions, to ask a mother where her sons were last night, and to understand the lie in her hesitation. The Australian method was linguistic jujitsu. They embraced the pidgin. This wasn't a failure to learn proper Vietnamese, it was a deliberate adaptive tool. Pidgin languages emerge at contact points between cultures with no common tongue. They strip communication to its bare functional bones. The Australians created a battlefield pidgin, Vietnamese nouns and verbs slammed into English sentence structure, seasoned with French colonial remnants and hand gestures. A digger wouldn't struggle with the tonal subtleties of "Did the Viet Cong pass through here?" He would say, "May thang VC di qua die, home qua. Some guys VC go through here yesterday."
This achieved two psychological feats. First, it demonstrated effort. In a culture where respect is paramount, the attempt to speak the language, however clumsily, breached walls that a phrasebook command could never scale. It humanized the soldier. Second, it created a shared low-stakes space. The villager, hearing his own language mangled, often felt a subconscious shift from being interrogated by an alien power to participating in a shared, slightly absurd attempt at communication. He might even correct the soldier. In that moment, a connection, tiny, fragile, was forged. The Australian was no longer just a uniform, he was a bad Vietnamese speaker, a character he could comprehend. The case of Long Phuc Hamlet, January 1968, is etched in battalion lore. A company from 7 RAR was on a cordon and search operation. American intelligence suggested the hamlet was cold. As the Australians moved in, a young lieutenant who had doggedly practiced his pidgin with an interpreter approached a group of old men playing ko tuong, Chinese chess, under a banyan tree. Following protocol, he gave the standard assurances. One old man, without looking up from the board, said quietly in broken English, "Number 10 today. Very number 10." Number 10 was pidgin, from the Vietnamese te, bad, for a deeply dangerous situation. The lieutenant pressed in pidgin, "VC Trong Lang? VC in village?" The old man simply moved a piece. "Ko." "Yes." That single hard-won syllable changed everything. The Australian company shifted from a search posture to an assault formation. They moved not as policemen, but as hunters. They uncovered a complex of tunnels and a hidden cache of weapons. A planned VC ambush from within the hamlet was preempted. The Americans, operating in a neighboring sector that day with identical initial intelligence, found nothing but silent, fearful faces. They had no pidgin bridge, and thus no warning. The intelligence wasn't in a captured document, it was in a shared linguistic space, accessible only to those who had built it. The Viet Cong's political apparatus thrived on monopolizing communication with the people. They were the narrators. The arrival of a foreign force that could bypass their narrative and speak directly, however crudely, to the population was a strategic threat. VC cadre began reporting that villages were becoming harder to read. The people, once a predictable sea of silence or hostility toward foreigners, now sometimes exhibited a dangerous familiarity. The Australians were not just an army to hide from, they were a competing voice. This eroded the VC's most vital asset, their invisibility in the human landscape. When people start talking, even in broken phrases, the shadows where gorillas hide begin to shrink. American advisors, particularly those embedded with Australian units, began to file notes that read less like tactical reports and more like anthropological studies. One Marine Corps captain wrote in 1969, "The Australian digger will sit for an hour trying to ask a woman about her missing chickens if he thinks it will make her smile." At first, we saw this as a lack of focus. Then, we noticed their company patrols consistently had better human intelligence than our battalion. They weren't just searching villages, they were talking to them. We had the loudspeakers, but they had the conversation. The U.S. military, for all its resources, never systematized this approach. The Hearts and Minds campaign remained largely a slogan, while the Australians had discovered its most fundamental tool, a shared, however imperfect, vocabulary. The divergence between Australian pidgin and American hand signals reveals a chasm deeper than linguistics. It was a chasm of philosophy. One side saw the war as a problem of physics to be dominated. The other understood it as a problem of psychology to be navigated. The Australians realized that before you can secure a village, you must first be able to ask it for a cup of water. They weaponized humility, and in doing so, gained access to a layer of reality invisible to pure force. This is the timeless lesson. Supremacy in conflict is not merely a measure of whose technology is louder, but of whose understanding is clearer. The most formidable barrier is often not a wall of stone, but a wall of silence. And the most effective way to breach that wall is not with a shout, but with a patient, stumbling human attempt to speak. If you value these hidden stories of adaptation and human ingenuity, help us bring more to light. Like and subscribe for deep dives into the untold strategies of history. Share this video with someone who knows that the most powerful words are often the simplest ones. In the comments, tell us, what's one situation where simply trying to communicate changed everything?